Hi, my name is Ngina.
And I'm Mehek, and we are the Disruptors.
Remember, this is not just history, it's Kenya's story untold, untamed, and unruly. And in this season, we are talking about political assassinations in post independence Kenya. So now let's go back to the beginning.
So, J.M. Kariuki, one of the most prolific politicians in Kenya's history, was born in the Rift Valley province to actually a family of 5 siblings. He was the only boy, and they were all brought up in the squatter. They were all squatters in White Highlands, which Gina will be getting into a little bit later. Born in abject poverty, Kariuki actually had this very intense yearning to learn. Sadly, he had to drop out of school sometime in 1938 because he could not pay school fees. So he would go on actually to work at a European settler's farm after he dropped out of school. And funny enough, he would go on to bet on horses. I don't know where this trajectory comes from. But all of a sudden, he's working at a European settler's farm. And one day he decides to bet, right? Betting on horse races, which we all know if you win, you make a lot of money. He won. And he goes on to use those winnings to fund his further studies, whereby he re-enrolled himself in primary school. And he attended a lot of schools from this point onwards with the money he had. And he would finish his education in 1950. And that's when he would this is in Kenya at that point, right? He's finished his primary school, and then he would move to Uganda to study at the King's College. At that time, it was called the King's College. And he was there between 1950 and 1952, 53. He would come back to Kenya. And mind you, while he was in Uganda, it's not like he ever stopped, looking at the news for home, seeing what's going on, because of course we were at a very tumultuous time at that point. So Kariuki returns, an emergency is declared. And this leads us into a very interesting part of his life.
Yeah. So Kariuki comes back to Kenya around October. And now Kenya's in a state of emergency has been declared. It was a no-brainer for Kariuki to join Mau Mau. The reason being is his parents were displaced in 1928 from their family land. And then they ended up being squatters on the settler highlands. So, of course, with this came very low wages, of course, deprived land rights, which we'll see is something that he carries on all the way to the end. And even the idea of them being forced to be squatters. So, and also let's remember that in as much as Kariuki was a student, he was also a theater kid. And him being a theater kid, he used the arts as a form of resistance. We've seen this very many times till date. And so when he comes back, it was a no-brainer. So he takes the oath to become part of the Mau Mau. And he actually is a liaison officer between Eldoret and Nakuru for the Mau Mau. Basically, he was the official point of contact for the Mau Mau group in Eldoret.
And Kisumu.
Yes. And apart from this, he would solicit money, boots, and housing for the Mau Mau. And this is what actually leads to him being detained in 1953, literally a year after. So he's detained. He's arrested when he's in a hotel. Then he's arrested and detained. And he's actually detained for 7 years. And in between this time, he's taken to very different camps. But one that's very notable is the Langata camp and the Co-op detention camp. So for 7 years, he's detained. Then in 1960, he's released. 1960, there looks to be, how can we call it? There's a new wave of resistance going on in the country. There's some hope that the country is going to get independence. So he gets out, and in 1960...
Riding on that hope, he goes to visit Kenyatta, who is still in detention at that time, to ask him if he can start the Nyeri branch of KANU. And between 1960 and 1963, he continues to do that work until independence is upon us. And he then becomes a private secretary of Kenyatta. So he is in this role between 1963 and 1969. They have a very amicable relationship. Kariuki and Kenyatta are pretty much on the same side of history at this point, right? If we look at it, these are two people who, according to history, did fight for independence, did struggle for independence in their own ways. Of course, their trajectories were different, but here they were together, working together. However, as is with Mzee and most of his relationships post 1963, in late 1969, the early 1970s, the relationship starts deteriorating. This is because, as Gina mentioned, there was a land issue that Kariuki really held on to his life for the rest of his life. And he was very, very, very done with how the Kenyatta government was operating at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He believed there was a lot of corruption going on. He believed that there was a level of impunity in the higher circle that he could not bear with. And the biggest issue that he contended the most was the fact that the money that was given by the United Kingdom post-independence to the Kenyatta regime to buy back, this sounds so crazy when you say it out loud, to buy back land from the European settlers, because reminder, they had 1,000-year lease on our land, on Kenyan land. So the money was unfortunately never used for that. All the land that was supposed to be given back to its rightful owners ended up becoming a political tool for the Kenyatta regime to appease their friends or to gain political allies in certain areas, which is something that Kariuki could not stand for, considering his own family had been displaced from their home. And this led to what would probably be now the most tumultuous years of Kariuki's life. Because we're here in 1970, and we find things are not looking good for GM at this point. However, before things get bad, they did get a little bit good for him. GM was really, really popular amongst Kenyans. He was considered this man, despite him at this point being a millionaire, he was considered to be very relatable. He was someone that could speak to the common people. There's a very famous quote of his where he says, Kenya has become a nation of 10 millionaires and 10 million beggars, something that is very key that we'll bring up later. And he would go on to become, in 1974, he would become Nyandarua's MP, which, by the way, the Kenyatta regime did not want him to become at all. He would also become assistant minister between 74 and 75 for agriculture. Again, something that the regime really tried to thwart, but couldn't because of the immense popularity that JM held with Kenyans. And but this unfortunately came at a time when his life was numbered. The days in his life were numbered. We see quite a concerning trend that comes in. And it's 1975. Kariuki is doing his ministerial works, but however, there's an ailment that is really disturbing him that advises JM, do not go to Mombasa. This man's tickets are booked, his bags are packed. It's the evening before he has to go. And when Gigi tells him this, JM is like, okay, I understand. And without telling anyone, JM cancels his trip. He has not informed his office, has not informed anyone. He's like, okay, I just won't get on that bus. However, on 1st March 1975, when JM was meant to board a bus,
the OTC
to Mombasa, a bomb goes off and kills 27 people and injures 90 more, most of them women and children. That was the bus JM was supposed to be on. While the government's official statement on that bomb attack was that it was done by a terrorist organization, it is widely believed that that was the first assassination attempt on JM Kariuki's life.
Yeah.
However, he may have thwarted death, but only for 48 hours. On 2nd March, he's last seen alive at the Hilton Hotel with a GSU officer, a special branch officer, and one of Jomo Kenyatta's bodyguards.
Wanyuike Fuku.
Exactly.
He's actually he's a police reservist. He's not part of GSU. But so on the 2nd of March, 1975, a friend of JM and a GSU commandant calls him and tells him he needs to come through to the headquarters
Mm-hmm.
for, like a little meeting, something like that. But he was worried.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, because his pistol had been withdrawn by the then Nyandarua DC.
Mm-hmm.
There's been assassination attempt already. And he actually voices his concerns to the GSU commandant, who's actually called Ben
Mm-hmm.
Geddy. So he thinks he's talking to his friend, and Ben Geddy tells him, I'm going to escort you. Let's just make sure you go for the meeting. This meeting was at Kingsway House. And Ben Geddy gives him a pistol. It's the same way I can give you a pistol, like just use this because your pistol has been withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
Just use this in case. Have this on you in case. So they get into the meeting. And this is something that one James Khatwenge comes to talk about 45 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's now putting his theory now in the timeline. So what happens is he gets into this room and it's like going in for an interview. There are people there, but now it didn't feel friendly. And so he starts getting interrogated. And Wanyuike, who's Jomo Kenyatta's bodyguard, slaps JM. He slaps him, and because he was a very built guy, he can beat you up. I mean, one of his teeth, they fall out.
Mm-hmm.
In that process, of course, JM is now feeling threatened. He reaches for his pistol. Ben Geddy,
According to
James,
yes,
takes out a gun, and because he's GSU and they describe them as very sharp shooters, shoots him in the arm just to disarm him. And the reason why he puts it this way is because, number one, if JM would have taken out the pistol to shoot Wanyoike, Ben would have been in trouble with the president,
mm-hmm.
because how did a GSU pistol kill or hit a police reservist who was in his...
was literally the bodyguard of the
Yeah,
president.
so how would he have answered that question? And in that situation, they look at JM, and JM was very... he was a yapper, basically, or they saw him like a yapper. This guy would have snitched. So they thought about it and they were like, if JM leaves this room with no tooth and with a plaster on his arm, he's going to speak.
Mm-hmm.
He's literally going to snitch. This is what happened. This is what happened. And so a decision is made with very poor plans, according to James. James says he was part of a special unit, and when special units plan killings of people, they have planned to the latter, like they even know how they're going to bury this person. And so he describes the whole situation as something that was never meant to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so a decision is made in that room, and Ben Geddy, according to James again, don't come for me, shoots JM again. And this is the
fatal shot.
Yeah,
basically.
the fatal shot, basically. And JM is dead. This is 2nd March.
So mind you, at this point, no one knows he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
For JM's family, and then later his friends in parliament, JM is missing. JM has suddenly disappeared from his house.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And for James to go ahead and say he was not meant to be killed on 2nd March meant JM was meant to be assassinated, just not on 2nd March.
Day. Yeah.
So between 2nd March and 12th March, according to now what we know, is for the family and friends, JM is missing for 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Between 2nd and 12th, there has been no discovery made of his body. This is for the family.
And friends.
On 6th March, Charles Rubia, who is actually a very good friend of JM Kariuki, they both had the same political ideologies. They both worked together a lot.
Yeah, they were actually anti-establishment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He brings it up in parliament. Basically just the question that, where is JM? It's been 6 days.
It's been 4 days.
It's been 4 days at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Where is
JM?
where is JM? Where is the MP of Nyandarua? Why is he not reporting to Parliament?
Yeah.
To this, there was no response
And it actually now just becomes a debate in Parliament.
of where could he be, right?
Remember, this is for family and friends.
Only.
Yeah. Now let me take you back again to the 2nd. Now that 2nd of March, after he is killed, again, these guys have no plan. They don't know how to dispose this body. They don't even know how to say that JM is dead. Around the same time, the Meat Commission had been told they had a very specific way of having the vehicles painted.
Yes.
So there was a car, it was just basically had to be white with a red strip
written meat. You've probably seen them around town.
Yeah. Yeah. So according to James, again, these guys go to Jivanji Gardens, find a car, one of those meat cars.
Vans.
Yeah. Carjack it basically. Put in JM's body. And the thinking is, even if blood drips, people on the road will just be like, oh, these Dagoretti people who are carrying meat. And they take JM's body all the way to Ngong Forest and they dispose of it.
How it's disposed of is extremely brutal. And if you don't want to hear this, you'd probably want to fast forward. But basically, JM's body, number one, was left in a place with a lot of hyenas. Basically, they did not want his body to be found.
And it was actually known that people who take bodies to Ngong Forest
want to be eaten by hyenas.
Yeah.
I guess by God's grace, his body wasn't eaten because his body was found by a Maasai shepherd who found the lifeless body of a man with his eyes gorged out, his hands chopped off, and acid poured on his face to completely make it impossible to identify this man. So number one, they didn't want this man to be identified. Secondly, they didn't even want his body to be found. Yeah. It was found on the same day that he was murdered, but no one would know about it until a very fateful call on 12th of March, 1975.
Yeah.
Terry, one of the three wives of JM Kariuki, receives a very ominous call. This man describes himself as an Israeli businessman. I don't know why he would just say, get to the point, but he didn't. According to Terry, that's how he identified himself. And he told her, have you gone to the Nairobi City morgue to find your husband's body? Terry was like, what? No. I mean, we have been to the morgue, but we haven't found anything.
Yeah.
This is according to one of her accounts. And he says, just go. Just go to Nairobi City morgue and look. So Terry informs the other two wives, and all three of them go together to the morgue to see whether or not this random call is actually true. When they go there, Terry notices something very odd. The body is not in one of the... So when you're in a morgue, all the bodies are placed in like cooler boxes so that the body can be preserved for identification, because it's not a must. Some of the bodies that are brought into the morgue are not always identified, or it's very hard to find family. So it takes time, right, for funeral processions to happen. So she realizes the body is not in one of those cooler boxes. And if we believe the timeline that James has given us and the fact that the body was actually found in second, again, this body was just left to decompose. They really did not want anyone to find out that JM had been killed.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing Terry notices. And the second thing she notices is, and something that she also tells some journalists is, there was a label, which there's a different account for this label as well. But for Terry's account, all she saw, it said unknown. And for her, it felt like, I've been looking for my husband for 12 days. Sorry, since the
10
second.
days,
So 10 days. I've been looking for my husband for 10 days. And here he is lying lifeless in a very horrific state, being called unknown. For her, that hurt her a lot.
Yeah. Considering the man he was.
Considering who he was.
Yeah.
And the only way that the family was actually able to identify them, because his skin had been darkened by the acid so much, was that you literally couldn't tell by his face. And so his green jacket that he wore on 2nd March and the spotted scarf was what was able to basically identify to the wives that that's JM.
Yeah.
Now, this is where the details get a little bit murky. We will get into it. But basically, two of the wives head over to Parliament, which at that time didn't have a fence, by the way. We looked it up. It didn't have a fence. They went to Parliament. And while the proceedings were going on, they yelled, JM Kariuki has been killed. JM Kariuki is dead.
Mm.
And the drama, I think I'll let you talk about it because,
The
oh my
drama
God.
just starts there. But even before we get into the drama, there's also another account at the morgue by a journalist. I think he was an investigative journalist, but apart from him being an investigative journalist, he was a friend to JM. So him being an investigative journalist, he saw in the paper a very tiny thing just written, a smartly dressed African man has been found in Gong Forest and his body has been taken to the mortuary. But him being a journalist, he's called Ritho. Him being a journalist, he's like, okay, I think that raised bells in his head, I guess. And he goes to the mortuary and he's told, like, dismantle your cameras and whatever so that you're able to enter, but don't enter saying you're going to look for this specific thing. So he actually says that he would enter mortuary and say, there's someone, I'm trying to identify if one of my family members or whoever was in the OTC bus. So he enters and one by one they pull the cooler boxes. But then as they're pulling, he's not seeing this body. And then he's actually, like, from sources, he does not put out who his sources are. He's told by his sources that coming later, there's a body that's been hidden in the back. Now let's go to Parliament. This is now 12th March, 1975. The debate is still ongoing in Parliament, where the question is basically, where is JM? Martin Shikuku, Muizaga, and Grace Onyango are some of the people in Parliament at this time. And when the debate is still going on, they literally hear someone yelling, JM is dead. And in this debate, the then VP, Daniel Moi, is being questioned. Where is JM? And Moi literally tells them that the report he's received is that this is so weird because there's so many loopholes in this theory. So I wonder why he would even say it. But I guess according to the reports and our research, he was basically told to say this. He says that JM has gone to Zambia and that he was in the Intercontinental Hotel and he was meant to go to Tanzania.
How he was doing this without a passport is beyond me, because apparently his passport was still at home.
Exactly. And a Zambian minister and friend was called and he never met him. So how was he in Zambia? When did he go? There was nothing to show for it. And now they're hearing
the women
yelling outside. In this commotion, Muizaga actually puts it across as the minute he had people, the women yelling and the family in this commotion going on, he describes that Moi took out a white handkerchief, wiped his tears, and said that if this is the actual thing and I have been told to report on this, I am very sorry. So now there's a lot of commotion in Parliament. There's an account of Terry where she says that when she hears family has gone to Parliament, she also joins them and she actually pours coffee on a senior minister, asking her where JM is and why have they killed JM, and government is what has killed JM, basically. So Martin Shikuku is one of the parliamentarians who round up people now to go to the mortuary, to go back to the mortuary to see what's going on. Now, here's where things get interesting. There's an account by Terry that says that when she went back to the morgue, she could see a body being shoved out of the window. So she literally says if she arrived there 10 minutes later, she would forever be known as the crazy woman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where there's a lot of things going on. So Martin, Grace, Muizaga, the family, and other parliamentarians have gone to the city mortuary and they've surrounded the whole place. And Grace Onyango actually makes a very notable thing. One of the guys they meet is a mortuary attendant. He's literally worn
The uniform.
that's been written mortuary attendant. But Grace Onyango notices this guy and he notices that he's actually part of the Parliament Special Branch Officer. And according to Mizaga's account, Grace Onyango actually asks this guy in the Luo, you've now become a mortuary attendant. Now they go in to the mortuary and they start looking for this man's body. Again, according to, remember, this body is not in the cool box. So they keep on looking at the cool box, but there's nothing. And then they notice there's another body there. What is that? So Martin goes, Muizaga goes, and they notice on his foot the tag that's written there, which is different from Terry's account, is that it's been written an unclaimed body of a Luo gangster. Why Luo? Because apparently JM's body, his lower teeth had been removed. And this was a way of identifying Luos back then, mainly because that was their form of initiation. And Martin is like, this is not a Luo gangster. This is JM. This is JM. And yeah, so they literally, and that's how they find out that JM is dead. And it's announced. And what happens next is very obvious. University students start a protest, basically.
So the University of Nairobi students actually go on quite a large protest because this was now the third political assassination within the regime in a short number. Since independence to 1975, there have been high-profile killings already. There was Pinto, there was Boya at this point, and now we're here with JM Kariuki. It was a feeling of, it felt like, the country is at a point where it will do anything to maintain power. The regime would do anything to maintain power. So the students went on protest and the University of Nairobi campus is shut down until Jomo Kenyatta's death, actually. At least this is according to our research, that due to their protests, the campus is shut down and is not reopened until Ze passes on. We then have, as usual, a special committee set up in these assassination things. And we've come to realize is every time this is done, it's just to get people to stop being angry.
Yeah.
And actually, in the parliamentary reports, it is acknowledged that if Parliament did not put together a special committee,
the country would burn.
The country would have revolted, basically. Yeah. And then a very interesting thing happens with this parliamentary report is when, so this is again, the accounts start to differ. There's a lot of differing accounts in this story, but apparently Mzee asks for the names of people in his closest circle to be removed, one of them being Biu Koinange. That's saying something.
Yeah.
And actually, the original version of the report is also apparently is hidden. So the original with the original names that before Mzee asked them to be removed is actually hidden by some parliamentaries. That's an allegation.
Yeah.
And the final report that's submitted doesn't really shed light on who killed him, why he was killed, and never brings into account anyone. It does name a few people, Ben Gadhi included as well, but no one is ever arrested, no one's ever tried, nothing ever comes of it. And the family has to live with that from then on.
And now, 45 years later, when they actually get James to actually speak on it for the first time, something very interesting is that one of his daughters is actually interviewed. They speak to her and she brings it out as, you see, like how for Tomboya's execution, there was someone who was arrested, there was someone who was whatever. The whole
The timeline of after his
Yes.
death, yes.
it actually went about, and the family could get closure,
Mhm.
but their family never got closure. And now the worst bit about it is that J.M. Kariuki is never seen. There's a way he's painted.
Mhm.
People just think of JM and just think of his death, but they don't necessarily think of his contributions. And it's something that the daughter actually puts out as they really wish JM would be described in a better light
Mhm.
of some sort. Now, the interesting bit again about the same commission that was put out is that before it became a parliament committee, the first idea was it should just be debated. I think the same way they were debating his disappearance, they wanted his death to be debated on. But now you really can't do that because
He's dead.
he's dead. So, and it wouldn't bring out what the actual reason was. One account of Charles Rubia is that he actually says that he was one of the people who hid a report, the original report. And he actually gives it to a journalist and tells him, this is allegedly from our research, that he tells a journalist in case they're killed, in case whatever happens, he needs to publish it. But now all the names that were listed, now we researched some names, including Wanyoike Thuku. So Wanyoike Thuku, Mbiu Koinange, these guys are Kenyatta's friends. So it looked like all arrows were pointing to one person.
As the song suggests.
Yeah. And how to put it? When Charles puts this report together, they actually go to see the president. And Charles says that the president kind of fell into his trap because he says that Kenyatta basically said, if these guys are in the list, why is my name not in the list? And Charles actually says, your name was never mentioned. And then Kenyatta goes, I would like for you to remove Mbiu Koinange's name from the report. Now it becomes a very messy, a messy thing. It's interrupted from the very beginning. And so all these years till today, no one really knows how JM was killed, why he was killed. Not how, I mean, who killed JM, because it's quite obvious that of how he was killed. The postmortem actually comes out and says that he was killed with the gunshots are what killed him. But you can see the different ways they tried to cover up this murder. He was anti-establishment. This was a time where
you couldn't be anti-establishment.
You couldn't be anti-establishment, and you couldn't raise the issue of Jomo Kenyatta, who is going to succeed Jomo Kenyatta, basically. Because a few years before this, Tom Mboya is killed, and one of the main reasons he's killed is
he could be the next president.
Yes. And this is when James' speeches are also very messy, for lack of a better word. And also, let's not forget that JM was the only person who attended Tom Mboya's funeral. They were friends. For JM's burial, the one thing that we were able to just uncover was that there was a lot of security for a family that's mourning. It did not make sense. Also, very many people tried speaking, but they were heckled. Only one person was able to speak at JM Kariuki's funeral, and that's Mwai Kibaki. Yeah. And just like that, James' death just
becomes a footnote in our history.
Yeah. It literally becomes a footnote, yeah. And
that's it.
That's it.
There's a street named after him, like all the other political assassinations we've talked about. But that's kind of how they become at the end of it all. It's odd that their lives are distilled to a post on some roadside, and we never really know about their history. I think what JM stood for, despite the contradictory notions people had of him. Not everyone really liked the fact that he had 3 wives. They called some people have called him a womanizer. Yeah. Other people always wondered why a millionaire was speaking for the common mwananchi, basically. But I think for a man who saw his family lose their home, had to fund his education from horse betting wins, and, fought for the nation, I think some of the things he would say in his speeches, I don't think they were controversial. I think they were just too true
Yeah.
to be absorbed
They were
at that time.
necessary. Yeah.
They were necessary, but they were too truthful, and no one was ready to listen to it. And I don't think anyone's yet ready to listen to some of the things he had to say.
Yeah.
And sadly, that's how JM's life comes to an end.
And the weird bit is, for a case that has very many names being mentioned, it's very weird that no one was ever arrested.
Not a single person.
It's very weird. From Ben Geddy, Wanyuke Suku.
They didn't even try to scapegoat anyone.
Imagine, for the first
time. Anyways, so that's kind of how it ends. And again, as usual, if we've missed anything in any of our research, please do let us know. There's a lot of varying accounts in this story. We've tried to give you what we know has been corroborated, and we've tried to give you different accounts as well. But if there's anything that we may have missed, may have lost in maybe translation, or even in terms of the timeline, please let us know. All our resources will be linked in our description boxes as usual. And we look forward to you in the next season.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mehek again.
And I'm Gina.
And we are the Disruptors.